This has been fascinating so far. I could literally speak to each and every one of you for probably 2 hours, and I mean, topics are awesome. And I want to do something a little different. So the stream was conceptualized in 2010 as an online community with its own daily TV show. So we would say, let the UGC and online community speak for itself. So I'm going to speak just a little bit, and then we're going to get interactive, right? So one thing about workflow I think is super important. It's almost like martial arts. For lack of a better word, the Zen side, the concepts and the theory, the calm theory, the messaging and all that is just as important as the directions and instructions, the analogies. You can't just tell people, go engage, go, move and engage. You have to tell them how. I'll give you an example. When we launched the stream on Al Jazeera America, which is a different show than the stream on Al Jazeera English, getting engagement was difficult. Why? Because overseas, I'll give you an example, in Kenya, the platform for civic discussion is social media, right? So you don't have to ask people to come to it. When a stoplight is out in Nairobi, it's trending across the country, and they're having a discussion about how allocation of resources is off, all this good stuff. In the United States, there are other places for people to have those discussions that they trust. So what do they talk about in the States? They talk about, LeBron scored 50. They talk about, a natural disaster, a breaking news event, or the Grammys. So when we're having a private water discussion, private water issues in Maine, yeah, that's difficult. Not many people are discussing that or trending on social, right? So we had to go find those audiences. So conceptually, we gave them, think concentric circles of association. Who cares about private water in Maine? Me, directly affected by private water in Maine, right here. People living in Maine, maybe people with private water issues, people in the Northeast. So you're able to give them a way to target. So who fits into this group? You have to actively reach out to them. And then you have to tell them, we've created this hashtag for you to have the discussion. Now, what's the interesting part about that? When we have our live TV show, people from Kenya, who are also having private water issues, are chiming in. So it became a discussion of concentric circles overlapping that was absolutely fascinating. So when you think theory as well, when someone starts on my team, I think they must think I'm absolutely insane, which I think to succeed in this kind of fusion, you actually have to be, to take the sort of risks you need to succeed. Sending them books like Code by Lawrence Lessig, sending them books like The Wealth of Networks by Yochai Benkler, sending them books like The Art of War, right? Sending them short PDFs like The Cathedral and the Bazaar, right? Because really, the discussion we're having now is about the Cathedral and the Bazaar. Eric S. Raymond, who is an interesting gentleman, but made some acute observations a very, very long time ago. News, journalism, media is shifting towards a very open source model, even in the way stuff is being written now. It can be updated in real time, all that good stuff. So having a theoretical framework, very, very important. One thing I think was interesting when I was listening to folks speak is I didn't hear the term R&D used once. I hear innovation, innovate. Well, with what money, right? So when you're talking to higher ups, and I keep hearing, how do we make money off of it? Money, money, money. The number one way to kill a startup is to say we need to make money tomorrow. That's not how it works. You need to allow time to innovation, allow time for innovation, which is kind of how the stream worked. Luckily, we had a director of programs who was willing to give us 6 months to a year to grow. And we were struggling at first. It was not easy. But then we started to notice trends. We started to notice that our engagement, the way we had set things up, where engagement is number one. In the morning, our digital producer says, this is the feedback we've gotten from our online community. XYZ, it's done by the line producers. It's done by the digital producers, the hosts, all the way across the board. So when hashtag Occupy Wall Street hit, here's the conversation I had with the EP. Hey, I think we should do this. I think it's going to be large. Let's at least be prepared. Got an answer that was not necessarily in the affirmative. Came back and I said, if we don't do this, we should probably pack up our bags and leave. We don't know what we're doing, or we're not willing to take the risk. So we did it, and we were one of the first people on it telling the story with Storify, with the UGC that was happening on the ground, right? And this was really that first time we were getting that back and forth. People were amazed that they were seeing their own pictures. So we went and we used kind of the mantra, if the UGC tells the story properly, let it tell it. And then you fill in the blanks, right? Or if something is wrong, you go ahead and do that. So in terms of organizational structure, someone said you have to get the higher-ups involved, right? This is absolutely true, but let me show of hands. How many of you think social, digital, mobile are critical to your organization staying relevant, or maybe even being around in the next 5 years? Yeah, that's a lot of hands up, not willing to invest in R&D and take risk. Mental note, next time you speak to your higher-ups, you make that point, right? It's one of those slow deaths. Slow death, also related to open versus closed. One of the most interesting discussions we had earlier today was someone pointing to Facebook wanting to host all of your content. If you look at the history of things that have done well in a direct-to-consumer relationship, we're talking not enterprise. Does anyone remember AOL Instant Messenger? Yeah, right. Does anyone still use Blackberries and RIMs? Not so much. What did they all do? But way too late, they all opened up, right? So we have to be willing to open up. You own your own platforms. Maybe you try building platforms, but you have to live in places where other people are. In my opinion, this is just a reality, right? So I'm going to start off. And is there anyone that has a comment or a statement? And we'll go comment, question, statement. We'll go back and forth. All right.
So a lot of traditional media organizations and even new ones aren't structured in a way to innovate on the fly. That is to say, I think if you asked anybody who was practicing journalism in here right now, they'd say, I'm pretty busy, like way busy. And in fact, the emergence of having to fulfill social media content or whatever changes that. So from an infrastructure standpoint, I think one of the interesting conversations you and I have had in the past is how you are structured to where people who are practicing what they are doing are also modifying what they are doing as you're doing it. Can you address a little bit of that and talk about how other more static organizations might be able to incorporate that kind of mindset into everyone in the organization?
Sure. So this is changing. In a traditional organization, you would kind of have your design department. You might still have design here, social here, producers here, editors here. This doesn't work if you want to get a piece of content out quickly. So a designer or editor might do the best job at designing a piece of content or editing it, but timeliness is also part of the equation now. So what we said was we need to create workflow, process, and infrastructure that gives people 25 to 50% of what they need and then allows them to innovate on top, right? So we might have templates, right? So way back in the day, 2011, of Twitter graphics, right? We said, okay, guys, here is the pretty much standard template that works across the biggest apps. So whatever quote you have, whatever image you have, they've received maybe 4 days, 5 days of Photoshop training. Make it fit in here, get editorial sign-off, follow these guidelines. Now this person is a designer. They work in the creative department, and they work with editorial, and it's all done in one workflow very easily, right? So we've standardized apps, we've standardized process, and we've allowed them to be creative on top. And remember, if you give people options, options are combinatorial, right? So, it's the old thing, if you have 5 options times 5 options times 5 options, this actually begins to be a pretty big number. So uniqueness of video stays very high. So for example, if you're doing video, you say, how can we turn something over quickly, right? You might have a number of templates for tweets. You might have a number of quote templates, that sort of thing. So when I say templates, do people know what I'm talking about? Right? Okay. So it allows a person that doesn't have this high of a skill level, right, to create content that's here, create very quality content, but do it quickly, right? And then that same person promotes it on social media too, because they understand the story very well. So you might have multiple checkoffs, right? But the same person can carry it throughout. So they know which hashtags are relevant. They know which people have been spreading the story. They know all that stuff. There's no handoff or trade-off. And the thing is, there's not one person on your team that does this. 75% of your team can do it. You don't need gurus. You need people who are really good at doing stuff, and gurus who can come in and teach them. So, whoops.
So can you talk about the pros and cons of being a startup inside a large organization, and maybe how your structure is? Are you completely separate, or do you get some benefits?
So this is really, really interesting. The number one rule at startups is fail or die. Because if you're not failing, then you're not trying and you're not really innovating. So what we asked for was just that we be given time. But I'll give you a concrete example of wanting to do something different and not having to go through all the checks that would normally be required at a large media organization. Google Hangouts comes out in maybe August of 2011. How long do you think it took us to use Google Hangouts on air in a traditional media organization? Any guesses? Years? Maybe we're still waiting, right? 1 week. And we got Google Hangouts on air. So we wanted to achieve two things. Sometimes the medium is the message. In this case, Google Hangouts met that. We said, we want to do something different from Skype. So everyone's going to be on Skype in like literally two to 6 months, something like that. So we got Google Hangouts hooked up, jerry-rigged in the control room, through a laptop, got it all on screen. But what we said is no people with official titles will be in the Hangout. These have to be people directly affected by the story, the citizen journalists reporting the story, whatever it may be, so it stays casual, right? Bringing truth to power, putting that to the more formal person that might be brought in via Skype or sitting as a guest host on set. But I mean, 1 week was a ridiculous turnaround. I had a chat with Google folks. They were surprised we did it. So while, and this is advantageous too though, while you're going through that process and you're iterating and you're learning, you're working with the producer of that product. So Google was actively working with us. So what we were able to do was we were given enough time, enough leadership, but then we were actually able to prove something on top of it. And what we were able to prove a little bit too was a cool factor. And cool, you can't put a monetary value on. And I don't mean cool in the sense like go write articles about cats. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about doing something different, trying something edgy, storytelling in a different way, enabling people that didn't have a voice before and giving them a medium which speaks to that. So, sure. By the way, there's another person with a mic going around, so.
So one of the barriers or challenges to innovating, I think sometimes is our own limits on our own time to do our own R&D. Sure. And I'm just curious, on your list of things that you think are most urgent for you to research right now, what's on your most urgent list to research personally?
I watched the Facebook F8 event, right? All of these big things, the Microsoft Windows 10 event, right? If your organizations aren't thinking about the Windows platform, you need to check into it, because we're talking across Xbox, across phones, all these different sorts of things. It's absolutely massive. I really like the potential for Facebook Messenger, because this is distinctly different. You know, WhatsApp, Line, all of these things, WeChat, I like them, and they have definite use case scenarios. The thing I don't like, I mean, the thing I like about Facebook Messenger is I can't exactly connect the dots, which means it's something a little different. Now, the hard part is how do you get a traditional media organization to jump on board and say, yeah, let's allocate resources and do it. I think if your organization is running a little behind, sometimes, you know, when you jump infrastructure, there's no reason to install DSL when cable and fiber are available, so to speak. You go right in, and it's a challenge unto yourselves. You say, this is how we become a big fish in what is still a small pond, because that is absolutely going to blow up. And it, in and of itself, is providing an ecosystem. So that's one thing I would do. And I mean, a challenge. There's a ton of Xboxes out there, Xbox Ones, and it's a different audience that's looking for different kinds of content. So how can you engage with those folks as well? And this is distinct and different.
I'll go.
Okay.
So I have a question. What does it feel like to fail, and what do you do in terms of backup plans? Like, what if the week-old Google Plus Hangouts, you were counting on them to fill airtime, and they pooped out? What do you do? And what does your boss do?
So I always use this quote, because it's 120% true. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Michael Jordan, 1980s, right? The thing about failing is you have to learn from it. If you're just doing the same thing over and over, this is one of the definitions of insanity, expecting a different result, unless some variable you don't know about has changed actively over time. So to me, if we are doing something or someone on my team is doing something, as long as a lesson can be learned, and maybe there's something taken from that that can help something else, but as long as we're tracking. The thing about R&D is it's really hard to say, okay, now I need to see something. That's really just a judgment call. But it's also a culture of allowing failure and saying failure is okay because failure means you're trying to do something. So we used to say we are a startup inside of Al Jazeera. I mean, that's why they brought me in. I come from a startup background and a consulting background. So it was somewhat accepted, I would say, begrudgingly at times.
So would there have been any blowback if the Google Plus Hangout on Air had pooped out? Were you prepared to fill the airtime, and would there have been any blowback from your boss?
You're always prepared to fill the downtime, and there would have been blowback, but I mean, you can justify it. You can justify it in the sense of, okay, or we can do, what is this show supposed to be? It's supposed to be your stories, your voice. It's supposed to be stories sourced from social media. We're saying we're using social media to actually bring those in actively. So we actually had, in a management point of view, justification. Oh yeah, sure.
So you were talking about basically a model that is vertically integrated, rapidly iterative content creation from small groups of people or even individuals. Some people will say that building that kind of model too broadly or applying it too broadly could be the ruin of really good journalism, and that you overtax your journalists to try to do too much. I'm sure you've heard that. To that you would say what?
What I've almost seen optimally in any project is once you get above about 5 people, there's somewhat diminishing returns, depending on the project, right? But you lose that tightness of a group. So we just launched a product a couple months ago. I purposefully left it at 3 to 5. And the result was much better than having 15 or 20 people working on it. Now, in the sense of overtaxing people, that I understand, and I do hear that. So we either have to split work, or we try to make it easier for them to get it done. So if we're seeing a consistent issue, then that should be addressed, and that'll save us time, money, increase quality of content, and get things out more quickly. There's no catch-all. If it's a process thing, fix the process. If it's a manpower thing, fix the manpower until diminishing returns, and then you just have to decide if it's worth doing. It's really a judgment call. Yeah.
Any more? We have time for maybe one more.
Yeah.
You talked about having templates set up and making it more possible for maybe 75% of the people to do certain things. And I'm wondering, I come from seeing bigger newsrooms and really small newsrooms in McClatchy, and reporters shooting video, and we want them to engage with commenting, and we want them to do a lot of different things. Where would you focus the resources? I mean, where should they engage sort of on, what would be your top couple of things where you would say engage first, engage second?
So you still have to have people who are specialists, right? But you can have a core of folks who are trained in many more fields than they used to be, right? But for example, a story is now told on a number of mediums, right? Consumption, so if you're a reporter and you happen to be covering X country, whether it be Yemen, something like that, it's not just doing your write-up in piece, it's sending it out because you actually end up being a node in this larger social network of discussion on that hashtag and topic. So those people obviously don't have as much time. If you will, you kind of give them the fairy dust on top. I need you to do this much, and we, the rest of the organization, will support you, right? So these are, your producers back home, whoever it may be, will send out that content, send out replies, send it out from the main account, all that good stuff. So it's a call on who has time and who would benefit the most from those platforms. So people like seeing that face, someone sending out saying, hey, I have a live hit in 5 minutes from Yemen, check it out. People will automatically end up sending them questions. You create that circle of engagement that you need, and then they can send it back to more traditional folks. So we, for example, have producers and digital producers and hosts all interacting with people, but it's kind of like a circular effect. They might get in touch with one of our hosts, and then someone else comes in and has that conversation with them to keep it going. But it's more of like an identifier and think extended brand for your organization. You know what I mean, in this way? Yeah?
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Rami.